This is the worst time to be alive in Warhammer. The day the sky split open, I was counting corpses. That was my job, my existence, until reality itself began to bleed. Now the stars have gone dark. The great rift tears across the galaxy like a wound that will never heal. In the Hive City, food runs scarce. The preachers scream that damnation has already come. Arbitrators execute deserters in the streets. I hear whispers that even the Emperor's light can no longer reach us. Each breath feels stolen from a universe that wants us dead. Each sunrise brings a sky more crimson than before. How long can a single human survive when the very fabric of existence has declared war on humanity? The day the sky split open, I was counting corpses. They arrived on cargo lifts from the lower hive, wrapped in plastic shrouds bearing the sigil of the administratum. Standard procedure dictated a verification of identity, a stamp of processing, and swift transfer to the corpse starch reclamation chambers. I had been doing this for 17 years. The face on my identification badge no longer resembled me. It showed a man with clear eyes and skin unmarked by the violet tributaries of toxin exposure. Sometimes I wondered if that person had ever existed. My name is Hadron Kell, Administratum Worker Grade Epsilon, citizen of Hive Tarantus on the world of Nefaris Secundus. My existence was simple. I catalogued the dead, I stamped their processing cards, I maintained the proper flow of human resources into the reclamation chambers. I received my ration cards, I slept in my assigned HAB unit. I awoke. I did it all again, until the day everything changed. The warning horns sounded first, their ancient tones reverberating through the metal bones of the hive. They were followed by the activation of emergency lumens, bathing everything in a bloody glow that made the corpses on my processing table look as though they still held life in their cheeks. The Vox system crackled with static before going silent, a rare occurrence. The Administratum prided itself on maintaining communications, even during the most severe industrial accidents or worker riots. I remember looking at my chronometer. It read 15 hours, 47 minutes, and 22 seconds. The numbers seemed important suddenly, as if they marked a division between one life and another. I did not yet understand why. The first tremor knocked 3 bodies from their slabs. The second tremor sent me sprawling across the ferrocrete floor, my uniform soaking up the disinfectant chemicals that had spilled from their containers. The third tremor was no physical movement at all. It was a sensation inside my skull, a pressure, a presence. I tasted copper on my tongue, and something sweet beneath it. Through the armor-glass viewing port of Processing Chamber 12, I saw the night shift supervisor, Madame Desault, sink to her knees. Blood trickled from her ears. She opened her mouth, but instead of a scream, crimson butterflies escaped. Their wings formed of her shredded tongue. They scattered into the air before disappearing like smoke. I blinked, and she was simply standing there, tapping frantically at her data slate, blood running from her nose. The hololith projector in the corner of the chamber flickered to life. It displayed the stern face of Lord Governor Allison, his features rendered in blue light. He appeared to be speaking, but no sound emerged. Behind him, I could make out the blurred shapes of what might have been Adeptus Astartes in full battle plate. The image dissolved into static, reforming as a picked feed from orbit. What I saw made no sense to a mind trained only to process the bureaucracy of death. The void above our world had torn open. A wound of swirling colors stretched across the blackness, pulsing with unnatural light. It was beautiful in a way that made my eyes water and my stomach clench with nausea. Ships burned in the void, tiny motes of flame against the immensity of that cosmic laceration. The feed cut out. The light failed. In the darkness, the only illumination came from the emergency lumens and the viewing ports that looked out upon the hive exterior. Through them, I saw the night sky had changed. What had once been stars was now a ribbon of impossible colors stretching from horizon to horizon. "The Emperor protects," whispered someone in the darkness. It might have been me. "The Emperor is dead." replied a voice I did not recognize. The words were treason, but nobody moved to identify the speaker. When the lumens returned, the processing chamber had changed. The corpses on their slabs seemed to watch us with cloudy eyes. Madame Desault was gone, though a trail of blood droplets led to the primary access door. The hololith projector displayed only the symbol of the administratum, turning slowly beneath the motto, "Serve in life. Serve in death. The system protects." The Vox system returned to life with a squeal of feedback. "Attention, citizens of Hive Tarantus. This is an emergency broadcast from the office of the Lord Governor. Remain at your assigned posts. Continue your appointed duties. Any deviation will be met with summary execution. The God Emperor watches over his faithful. The Great Rift is a test of faith. Repeat, this is an emergency broadcast. I return to my station. I process the dead. When my shift ended, I walked the 47 levels to my hab block. The elevators were reserved for those of gamma clearance or higher. Usually, the hab corridors were filled with workers transitioning between shifts, but that night they were empty, except for the occasional arbitrator patrol, their shock mauls powered and ready. My assigned roommate, Thaddeus, was not in our hab unit. His cot remained undisturbed, which was unlike him. Thaddeus worked in atmospheric processing, ensuring the air in the mid-hive remained breathable, if not pleasant. He often complained about the chemicals that stained his fingers yellow and made his breathing raspy. He had been coughing blood for weeks, but refused to report to the Medicae ward. A diagnosis of respiratory failure would result in immediate reassignment to the corpse starch reclamation chambers. He preferred a slow death to becoming a processor rather than the processed. I lay on my cot, listening to the distant sounds of the hive. Machinery groaned, pipes knocked. From somewhere far below came the muffled boom of an explosion, followed by the wail of emergency sirens. These were normal sounds, comforting in their familiarity. What was not normal were the screams. They started as a single voice, high and piercing, cutting through the ambient noise of the hive. Then another joined, and another, until it seemed the very walls were screaming. I placed my standard issue pillow over my head, but it did little to muffle the sound. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I dreamed of the sky splitting open like the belly of a corpse on my processing table, spilling its impossible colors across the surface of the world. In the dream, the colors formed hands that reached down to caress the spires of the hive, leaving them twisted and writhing like living things. I awoke to the sound of my alarm. My throat was raw, as if I had been the one screaming. The daily prayer to the God Emperor glowed on the data slate beside my cot. I recited it mechanically, the words meaningless but necessary. Failure to register morning devotions would result in a visit from the Adeptus Ministorum and possibly the arbitrators. Thaddeus still had not returned. His devotional remained unregistered, a dangerous oversight. I considered reporting his absence but decided against it. Reports created documentation. Documentation created accountability. In the administratum, accountability flowed downward, never up. If Thaddeus had fled or fallen, I wanted no part in the consequences. The communal washrooms were crowded, as always. Water flowed for precisely 90 seconds, barely enough time to rinse away the previous day's grime. The water had a reddish tint and smelled of rust and something else. Something sweet and rotten. No one commented on it. No one spoke at all. Conversations could be overheard, reported, documented. The Vox speakers in the corridor broadcast the morning announcements as I made my way to the lifts that would take me down to processing chamber 12. Attention, citizens. Ration allowances have been reduced by 17% due to supply chain disruptions. The Emperor rewards sacrifice. Loyalty is its own reward. Any citizen found hoarding or stealing rations will face immediate execution. Work assignments have been extended by 3 hours per shift until further notice. The Great Rift requires greater productivity. Your compliance honors the Golden Throne. Transportation between hab blocks is restricted until further notice. Remain in your assigned sectors. The Emperor protects the obedient. The lifts were functioning, but they moved more slowly than usual. Through the small, scratched viewing port, I could see sections of the hive interior that should have been humming with activity standing dark and empty. As the lift descended, I caught glimpses of arbitrator cordons blocking access to entire levels. Behind them, I thought I saw figures in the environment suits of biological containment teams. Processing Chamber 12 was busier than I had ever seen it. The slabs were filled with corpses, and more waited on gurneys in the corridors. Madame Dizol was back at her station, her face pale but composed. The blood had been cleaned from her uniform, but a faint stain remained on her collar. She did not look at us as we took our places at our stations. "Process at double speed," she announced, her voice flat. "Identification verification is suspended. All corpses are to be processed for reclamation immediately." This was highly irregular. Imperial bureaucracy demanded meticulous record-keeping, especially in death. Every citizen's remains were to be verified, their rolled service to the Imperium calculated, their genetic material sampled for purity testing, their death taxes assessed on surviving family members. To skip these steps was more than unusual. It was heresy. No one protested. We worked in silence, moving bodies from slabs to conveyors that would carry them to the reclamation chambers. I could not help noticing certain details. Many of the dead showed no obvious cause of death. Some had strange markings on their skin, like bruises that formed patterns too regular to be natural. Others had expressions of such terror frozen on their faces that I found myself avoiding looking at them directly. Hours passed. My hands grew slick with the fluids of the dead. The sweet copper taste returned to my mouth, though I had consumed nothing but my morning ration of nutrient paste. The lumens flickered occasionally, and each time they did, I thought I saw movement among the bodies waiting to be processed. During a brief pause while we waited for a jammed conveyor to be repaired, I found myself standing beside Weber, who had processed corpses at the station next to mine for as long as I could remember. We had never spoken beyond the necessary communications required for our work. Now he leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "They're saying the Astronomicon has gone out," he whispered. "No light from Terra. The Navigator Guilds are blind." I stepped away from him. Such talk was dangerous. If the Master of Mankind no longer lit the way through the warp, then all of humanity was adrift and alone in the darkness. It was unthinkable. It was treason to even consider it. Weber must have seen the fear in my eyes. He straightened, resuming his professional demeanor. "For the Emperor," he said loudly, turning back to his station. "The Emperor protects," I replied automatically. But as I returned to processing the endless line of the dead, a thought wormed its way into my mind, unwelcome and ineradicable. If the Astronomicon had truly failed, then the Emperor could no longer see us. And if he could not see us, how could he protect us? The conveyor lurched back into motion. I continued my work, pushing the blasphemous thought away, focusing on the mechanical movements of my hands. This was survival in the Imperium of man. Keep your head down. Do your assigned task. Do not question. Do not wonder. Do not think beyond the parameters of your station. But even as I processed the dead, I could not help noticing that the red glow from the emergency lumens never faded. Outside the small viewing ports, the sky remained torn open, bleeding its impossible colors into the void. Something had fundamentally changed in the galaxy. And deep in my bones, in a place beyond conscious thought, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The shift that should have ended after 12 hours stretched to 15, then 18. No relief workers arrived to take our places. Madame Desault made no announcements, simply pointing to the growing line of corpses when anyone looked as if they might stop working. My fingers grew numb. My back screamed with pain. The masks we wore to filter out the smells of death and chemicals grew damp with sweat and breath, chafing against skin that had long since passed from discomfort to raw agony. It was during the 19th hour that the first riots began. We heard them before we saw anything, a distant roar of human voices that grew steadily louder. The processing chamber had no external walls, so we could not see the streets of the hive, but the sounds told their own story: shouting, breaking glass, the distinctive crack of arbitrator shotguns, the whine of grav chutes as reinforcements deployed from higher levels. Madame Desault activated the security protocols. Armored shutters descended over the entrances to the processing chamber. The Vox system continued to broadcast reassurances that all was well, that the disturbances were minor and contained, that loyal citizens had nothing to fear. We continued to process the dead. By the 23rd hour, even Madame Desault could no longer pretend that work could continue. "Shift end," she announced. "Return to your assigned hab blocks. A double ration will be issued in recognition of your extended service." No one believed the promise of extra food. The administratum did not reward, it merely withheld punishment for adequate performance. The armored shutters retracted. We filed out into corridors that should have been bustling with activity, but were instead eerily quiet. Emergency lumens cast red shadows that transformed familiar passageways into something alien and threatening. The lifts were no longer operational. We would have to walk back to our hab blocks, climbing dozens of levels through maintenance stairwells never meant for mass transit. I found myself in a group with Weber and 4 other processors. None of us spoke as we climbed, the only sounds our labored breathing and the distant cacophony of the riots. At level 39, we encountered an arbitrator checkpoint. The black-armored figures scanned our identification badges without comment, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. One of them had a splash of something dark across his chest plate. It looked fresh. "Curfew begins in 20 minutes, the lead arbitrator announced. "Any citizen found outside their assigned hab unit after curfew will be assumed to be participating in seditious activities and dealt with accordingly." We hurried on, our tired legs finding new energy. The stairwell between levels 42 and 43 was blocked by debris from a collapsed wall. We were forced to detour through a service corridor that led us past the entrances to several hab blocks. The doors to hab block 42 Delta stood open. Inside, I caught glimpses of overturned furniture, broken data slates, and walls marked with symbols I had never seen before. No residents were visible. An Adeptus Ministorum priest stood in the center of the common area, swinging a censer that released thick clouds of incense. He was chanting something, his voice rising and falling in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. We hurried past, none of us wanting to catch the attention of the priest. The Ministorum had always been present in the hive, conducting services, leading prayers, ensuring the spiritual purity of the workforce. But they had never been so visible, so active, as they had become since the sky split open. When we reached level 47, we found the corridor to our hab block guarded by a squad of hive militia. They were ordinary workers, not arbitrators, but they carried the same grim determination in their eyes. One of them stepped forward as we approached. "Identification," he demanded. We presented our badges. The militiaman scrutinized mine for a long moment. "Hadrin Kell, Administratum Worker Grade Epsilon, Processing Chamber 12. You're late returning from shift." "Extended processing duties," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Madame Desault can verify." He studied my face, then nodded. "Your roommate is listed as Thaddeus Gorn, is that correct?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the perpetually cold air of the hive. "Yes. He works in atmospheric processing. Level 30. Thaddeus Gorn was arrested this morning for sedition and spreading panic. He claimed the atmospheric processors were being modified to distribute chemical agents throughout the hive. He has been transferred to the arbitrator holding facilities for interrogation." I kept my expression blank. To show concern would be to invite suspicion. To show relief would be inhuman. "I understand. May the Emperor's justice be served." The militiaman nodded, apparently satisfied with my response. "You may proceed to your hab unit. Remain there until your next assigned shift. Additional ration cards will be distributed tomorrow morning to compensate for today's reductions." I entered hab block 47 Epsilon with Weber and the others, each of us breaking off to our assigned units without farewell. The communal area was empty, the Vox screens dark. The silence was oppressive. My hab unit remained as I had left it that morning. Thaddeus's cot was still empty, but now it would remain so permanently. I sat on my own cot, too exhausted to remove my uniform or attempt to clean the residue of my work from my skin. I should have felt something about Thaddeus, fear for my own safety perhaps, as his roommate, relief that I had not been implicated in whatever he had done, anger that he had been foolish enough to speak out. Instead, I felt nothing but a dull acceptance. This was life in the Imperium. People disappeared, the machinery of bureaucracy ground on. I must have fallen asleep, because I was awakened by screams. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming of the riots, but these screams were closer. They came from within the hab block itself. I sat up, unsure what to do. The smart choice, the safe choice, would be to stay in my unit, to pretend I heard nothing. Instead, I found myself moving to the door, opening it just enough to peer out into the corridor. Other doors were similarly cracked open, other eyes watching cautiously. At the far end of the corridor, a door stood fully open, light spilling out, shadows moved within. The screams had stopped, replaced by a wet, gurgling sound. An arbitrator emerged from the open doorway. His armor was splashed with fresh blood. Behind him came two more arbitrators, dragging something between them. In the dim light, it took me a moment to recognize the torn remains of what had been a human being. The face was gone, the chest cavity opened. I could not tell if it had been a man or a woman. "Suspected warp contamination," announced the lead arbitrator, his voice carrying clearly down the corridor. "The taint has been cleansed. Return to your rest. The Emperor protects." The doors along the corridor quickly closed, including my own. I retreated to my cot, my heart pounding. Warp contamination. The words echoed in my mind. We all knew the stories, the whispered rumors of what happened when the barrier between real space and the immaterium weakened. Corruption, mutation, possession. But those were tales meant to frighten children into obedience, to ensure workers remained vigilant against the heretical thoughts that isolation and exhaustion might breed. They were not supposed to be real. Not here. Not in Hive Tarantus, a loyal imperial world far from the borders of the Imperium, far from the conflicts that raged eternally around its fringes. But the sky had split open. The Great Rift, they called it, and now nothing was certain. I lay awake until the morning alarm sounded, reciting the catechisms of loyalty that had been drilled into me since childhood. The Emperor protects. Vigilance is our shield. Faith is our armor. The words provided no comfort, but the familiar rhythm of them kept other, more dangerous thoughts at bay. When I registered my morning devotional, I noticed a new addition to the standard prayers. The hour of testing is upon us. Stand firm in your faith. Report all signs of corruption. Loyalty unto death. The communal washrooms were half empty. The water that flowed from the pipes was now decidedly reddish and smelled strongly of chemicals. It left my skin feeling slick and unclean. No one spoke. No one met anyone else's eyes. The Vox speakers broadcast new restrictions as I made my way to the lifts. "Attention citizens, due to ongoing security concerns, movement between hab blocks is prohibited except for essential personnel. Work shifts will continue as scheduled. Any citizen not at their assigned post will be considered in violation of Imperial law. Water rationing is now in effect. Atmospheric processors are operating at reduced capacity. Conserve your breaths. Report any unusual dreams or thoughts to the nearest Ministorum priest. The Emperor's light shines even in darkness." The lifts were operational, again, but now an arbitrator stood in each one, silent and watchful. As we descended to processing chamber 12, I noticed that many of the lights in the hive interior had failed. Entire sections stood in darkness. In others, emergency lumens cast their bloody glow. Through the small viewing port, I caught glimpses of figures moving in the shadows. Some wore the uniforms of maintenance workers or the robes of Ministorum priests. Others wore nothing that I recognized, their forms strangely distorted, as if seen through warped glass. Processing Chamber 12 had changed overnight. The walls were now covered with purity seals, strips of parchment bearing prayers and declarations of faith. Incense burners had been placed at each entrance, filling the air with heavy, cloying smoke. Servitors moved among the processing stations, anointing equipment with sacred oils. Madame de Sault stood at the center of the chamber, accompanied by a ministorum priest and 2 arbitrators. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. When she spoke, her voice cracked with strain. "Attention, processors. Before work begins, Confessor Dracus will lead us in prayer and perform the rites of purification. Your full participation is mandatory." The priest stepped forward. He was a tall, gaunt man with augmetic eyes that glowed faintly blue. His robes bore the symbols of the Adeptus Ministorum, but also other markings I did not recognize. When he spoke, his voice resonated unnaturally, as if multiple voices spoke through him. "Children of the Emperor," he intoned, raising his hands. "We stand at the threshold of judgment. The galaxy bleeds. The warp spills forth its corruption, but the faithful need not fear. The Emperor's light burns away all taint. Confess your doubts. Surrender your fears. Only through complete submission can you be cleansed." One by one, we were called forward to kneel before the priest. He would place his hands on each person's head, staring intently into their eyes with his glowing augmetics. Some were dismissed with a nod. Others were taken aside by the arbitrators for additional counseling. When my turn came, I knelt as required, keeping my eyes downcast. The priest's hands were cold against my temples, his fingers pressing hard enough to cause pain. "Look at me, Hadrin Kell," he commanded. I raised my eyes to meet his augmetic gaze. The blue glow intensified, seeming to pierce into my skull. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a sense of intrusion that went beyond the physical. "Your roommate was a heretic," the priest said. "He spread lies about the atmospheric processes. He questioned imperial authority. Did you share in his heresy? Did you harbor his doubts?" "No, Confessor," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I serve the Emperor loyally. I fulfill my assigned duties. I ask no questions." "And your dreams, Hadrin Kell? What do you dream of since the sky changed?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, remembering the dream of colors reaching down to twist the hive spires. To lie to a ministorum priest was heresy. To admit to such dreams was to invite suspicion. "I dream of working, Confessor," I said carefully, "of processing the dead, of serving the Imperium as I have always done." The pressure behind my eyes intensified. For a moment, I thought the priest would call me out for the lie. Then his hands withdrew, and he nodded to the arbitrators. "This one may return to his duties. The taint is minimal. Increased devotional requirements should suffice." Relief washed through me, followed immediately by guilt. I had lied to an agent of the Emperor's will, but the lie had kept me from whatever fate awaited those taken for additional counseling. As I returned to my processing station, I saw Weber being led away by the arbitrators. His face was blank, his movements mechanical. He did not look at me as he passed. Work began once the purification ritual was complete. Today, the bodies on the slabs were different. Many showed signs of violence. Arbitrator shotgun wounds, shock maul burns. Others bore the marks of what appeared to be ritual mutilation. Symbols carved into flesh, organs removed, eyes missing. And some showed changes that defied explanation. Limbs that seemed too long, joints that bent in impossible directions, skin that had hardened into a substance like carapace. One corpse had multiple mouths opening and closing rhythmically across its torso, even though it had been dead for hours according to the timestamp on its processing card. I worked mechanically, trying not to look too closely at what passed beneath my hands. The sweet copper taste had returned to my mouth, stronger than before. The incense in the air made my head swim. Twice, I found myself standing motionless at my station, minutes having passed without my awareness. No one commented on these lapses. Perhaps they were experiencing similar dissociations. Midway through the shift, the Vox system crackled to life with a broadcast that overrode the usual work directives. The voice was unfamiliar, the quality of the transmission poor, breaking up with static and strange harmonics. "Attention all Imperial citizens. This is Lord Inquisitor Varnax of the Ordo Malleus. The Cicatrix Maledictum, known as the Great Rift, has divided the Imperium. Warp storms of unprecedented scale have isolated many systems from the Emperor's light. Demonic incursion is a significant threat. Any citizen experiencing unusual thoughts, dreams, or physical changes must report to the nearest Ministorum facility immediately. Resist all urges to hide these symptoms. The Emperor's mercy awaits the honest. His judgment awaits the deceitful. Stand firm in your faith. Trust no one who displays erratic behavior. The Inquisition has assumed emergency authority under Directive Omega-17. Compliance is mandatory. The Emperor protects." The words "demonic incursion" hung in the air long after the transmission ended. No one spoke. No one looked up from their work, but I could feel the fear radiating from every person in the chamber. The Inquisition was here, on our world. There could be no clearer indication that the situation had escalated beyond the control of planetary authorities. I continued processing corpses, my movements automatic, my mind racing. The Inquisition did not come to restore order. They came to contain threats by any means necessary. Entire hive cities had been purged when the Inquisition deemed them irredeemably corrupted. Whole worlds had burned under their authority. As the shift progressed, the number of bodies showing signs of mutation increased. The processors worked in silence, none of us acknowledging what we were seeing. To speak of it would be to admit that we recognized the taint of the warp. Such knowledge itself could be deemed heretical. In the 21st hour of what should have been a 12-hour shift, the chamber trembled with a distant impact. Dust rained down from the ceiling, the lights flickered but held. No one paused in their work. A second impact followed, closer this time. The conveyor belt stuttered, then resumed its relentless movement. Through the small viewing ports, I caught a glimpse of fire in the sky, something burning as it fell through the atmosphere. The third impact struck the hive itself. The entire structure shuddered, slabs toppled, bodies fell to the floor. The lights failed completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by the emergency lumens and the strange, pulsating glow from the sky outside. "Remain at your stations," Madame Desault's voice called out in the darkness. "Auxiliary power will activate shortly. The Emperor protects." But the auxiliary power did not come online. We stood in the dark, surrounded by the dead. Minutes stretched into an hour. No directives came, no arbitrators appeared to restore order. Even Madame Desault fell silent. It was Thorn, a processor I barely knew, who finally spoke. "They're bombing us," he said, his voice cracking. "The Inquisition is cleansing the hive." "Silence that talk," snapped Madame Desault from the darkness. "The Imperium protects its loyal servants. These impacts are from enemy action. The planetary defense forces are responding." "There is no enemy except the one within," Thorn persisted. "The rift has corrupted us. They will burn us all rather than risk the spread." The sound of a shock maul activating cut through the darkness. A brief blue flash illuminated Madame Desault advancing on Thorn. "Sedition is punishable by death," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. Before she could reach him, the lights returned, flooding the chamber with harsh illumination. But something was wrong. The light had a quality I had never seen before, a shimmering, opalescent quality that hurt the eyes. The air seemed to warp and twist, creating distortions through which the processing chamber appeared, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Madame Desault stood frozen, the shock maul raised above her head. Her eyes widened as she looked past Thorn, past all of us, to the far wall of the chamber. I turned to follow her gaze. The wall was no longer there. In its place was a rippling curtain of energy, a vertical pool of the same impossible colors that had torn open the sky. And through this breach stepped figures that no human mind was meant to comprehend. They moved with a liquid grace that denied the solidity of flesh, their forms shifting and reforming with each motion. What might have been heads bore too many eyes, too many mouths. What might have been limbs ended in appendages that changed from claws to tentacles to humanoid hands and back again. They radiated a presence that pressed against my mind like a weight, threatening to crush my sanity beneath concepts for which human language had no words. "Daemons," whispered Madame de Sault, the shock maul falling from nerveless fingers. "Emperor, preserve us. The veil has failed." One of the Dodd entities turned toward her. I cannot describe its face, for it had many and none. It made a sound that might have been speech, or might have been the screams of 1,000 souls in torment. Madame de Sault's body contorted, her spine arching backward until it snapped with an audible crack. Her flesh rippled beneath her uniform, then burst outward in a spray of blood and viscera. Where she had stood was now another of the entities, wearing scraps of her uniform like a mockery of imperial authority. Panic erupted. Processors ran for the exits, only to find them sealed. Arbitrators appeared, firing their shotguns at the entities. The shells passed through the daemon flesh with no effect. The creatures responded with gestures that caused the arbitrators to dissolve into clouds of red mist, their armor clattering empty to the floor. I stood paralyzed, unable to run, unable even to scream. One of the daemons approached me, moving with that impossible fluidity. It extended a limb that terminated in what might have been a hand with too many fingers, each one tipped with a miniature mouth. The mouths spoke in unison, the words bypassing my ears to form directly in my mind. "The galaxy has changed, little counter of corpses, the barriers thin, the Imperium hungers. What once was impossible is now inevitable. What will you become in this new reality? Will you cling to your corpse god, or will you embrace the glory of transformation?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The entity's presence pressed against my consciousness, seeking entry. I felt my thoughts fragmenting, my sense of self beginning to dissolve. Then another impact struck the hive, closer than any before. The floor buckled, pipes burst, spraying steam and chemicals. The daemon before me wavered, its form becoming momentarily transparent. It hissed in what might have been frustration or pain. "The anathema's servants resist still, but they cannot hold back the tide forever. Remember, little counter, remember, when the choices come." The entity withdrew, flowing back toward the breach in reality. The other daemons followed, dragging screaming processors with them into that impossible portal. Then the breach itself collapsed, reality snapping back into place with a thunderclap that shattered every glass surface in the chamber. I found myself on my knees, ears bleeding, surrounded by the dead and dying. Processors lay where they had fallen, some killed by the daemons, others by flying debris or the shockwave of the breach collapsing. The corpses that had awaited processing were strewn about, indistinguishable now from the freshly dead workers. Through the broken viewing ports, I could see Imperial ships in the sky, the distinctive hammerhead prows of Navy destroyers, the blocky silhouettes of troop carriers. Lights flashed as void shields repelled incoming fire from unseen enemies. The Vox system sputtered to life, the message broken and distorted. "Immediate evacuation, priority personnel only. Contamination protocols. May the Emperor have mercy." I struggled to my feet. The processing chamber was in ruins. The exits remained sealed, but the walls had been breached in several places by the force of the explosion when the daemon portal collapsed. Through one such breach, I could see a maintenance corridor, empty and dark. Survival instinct took over. I had no plan beyond escape, no destination beyond away from this chamber of death. I climbed through the jagged hole in the wall, cutting my hands and face on twisted metal. The pain was distant, unimportant. I staggered down the maintenance corridor, guided only by the faint glow of emergency lumens. I had entered a realm of pure instinct, a state beyond thought where only movement mattered. Forward, always forward, away from death. toward survival, if such a thing still existed in a world where reality itself had become unreliable. The maintenance corridor led to a junction. Pipes ran in all directions, carrying the lifeblood of the hive, water and power and waste. Steam hissed from ruptures in their metal skin. I had no knowledge of these areas. These arteries and veins of the hive normally tended only by maintenance crews with the proper clearances. In the Imperium, to be found in an area above your station was itself a crime, but law had become a distant concern, secondary to the imperative of continued existence. I chose a path at random, following a corridor that sloped upward. Up meant the higher levels of the hive, where the air was cleaner, where the nobility and the higher ranks of the administratum dwelled. Logic suggested they would be evacuated first if evacuation was indeed underway. Where the powerful went, safety might follow. The corridor ended at a heavy metal door. It bore the skull and cog symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus. I hesitated. To trespass in the domain of the tech priests was to invite a fate potentially worse than what I fled. Their secrets were jealously guarded, their customs alien even by the standards of imperial society. But the sound of another impact shook dust from the ceiling, the vibration traveling through the metal beneath my feet. There was no time for hesitation. I pushed against the door. It resisted for a moment, then swung open with surprising ease. Beyond lay a chamber filled with machinery I could not identify. Cogitators lined the walls, their screens flickering with streams of data. Cables thick as a man's arm hung from the ceiling, pulsing with energy. The air smelled of ozone and sacred unguents. The chamber was empty of human presence, but not unoccupied. Servo skulls drifted through the air, their eye lenses glowing red as they performed their programmed tasks. They paid me no attention, their machine spirits concerned only with their assigned duties. I moved through the chamber cautiously, expecting at any moment to encounter the red-robed form of a tech priest or the lumbering bulk of a servitor, but the only sound was the hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of energy discharges between exposed cables. At the far side of the chamber, another door stood open. Through it, I caught a glimpse of a corridor that looked more conventional, its walls bearing the imperial aquila rather than the mechanicus cog. I hurried toward it, eager to leave the domain of the tech priests before my presence was noted. As I reached the threshold, a servo skull descended, hovering directly in my path. Its single-eye lens focused on my face. A mechanical voice emerged from its vox grill. Identify. Authorization level. Purpose of presence in Mechanicus Enclave. I froze. To run would trigger security protocols. To stay was to admit my trespass. I did the only thing I could think of. I lied. Hadrin Kell, Administratum Worker Grade Epsilon, Emergency Protocol Activation, seeking route to Evacuation Point Delta. The servo skull remained motionless for what seemed an eternity. Then it drifted aside. Proceed. All personnel to evacuation points. Warp incursion imminent. The Omnissiah protects the faithful. I hurried past, not questioning my good fortune. The corridor beyond led to a junction with directional signs. The symbols meant nothing to me, using a system of notation I had never encountered. But one sign bore the familiar shape of a lift car. I followed its direction, emerging into a lift bay unlike any I had seen before. The lifts here were larger, their doors ornate with gold filigree and purity seals. One stood open, its interior illuminated. Inside, a servitor stood at the controls, its mostly human face vacant of expression, its augmetic arms ending in interface plugs rather than hands. Destination, it intoned as I entered. I hesitated. I had no knowledge of where evacuation points might be located in the upper hive. To name a destination I was not authorized to access would alert security. To remain in the lower hive was to court death. Evacuation point nearest to current. Location, I said finally. The servitor's augmetic eyes flickered. Evacuation priority alpha through gamma only. Identify clearance level. Before I could respond, the lift shuddered as another impact struck the hive. The lights flickered. The servitor twitched, sparks flying from its interface plugs. System override, it announced in a flatter tone than before. All evacuation protocols activated, proceeding to nearest evacuation point. Level 112. Administratum Command Center. The lift doors closed. The car began to ascend with a speed that forced me to grab a handrail for support. The servitor stood motionless, apparently reset by whatever override had activated in the system. Level 112. I had never been above level 60 in my entire life. The command center would be filled with the highest ranks of the Administratum, perhaps even representatives of the Adeptus Terra itself. I would be immediately identified as an interloper, arrested, executed, but the alternative was to return to the daemon-infested lower hive. Between certain death and probable death, the choice was simple. The lift continued its ascent, the floor indicator showing numbers I had never imagined I would see. 90, 95, 100. With each level, I felt a pressure building in my ears, a sense of displacement that went beyond the physical sensation of rapid ascent. When the doors finally opened at level 112, I was confronted with a scene of controlled chaos. A vast chamber stretched before me, its ceiling lost in shadows far above. Hololith projectors displayed tactical maps of the hive and the surrounding area. Robed figures moved between data stations, their voices raised in argument or urgent communication. No one looked at me as I stepped from the lift. The servitor remained inside, motionless, as the doors closed behind me. I stood frozen, certain that at any moment someone would challenge my presence. But the officials of the Administratum Command Center were focused entirely on the crisis at hand. I moved cautiously toward the nearest wall, trying to make myself inconspicuous. From there, I could observe the chamber and perhaps find a way to blend in, to survive. The largest hololith showed the hive from orbit. The image was terrifying. The great rift dominated the sky, its swirling colors now visibly reaching tendrils down to the planet's surface. Multiple breach points glowed with unnatural light, marking places where the barrier between real space and the warp had failed completely. One such point pulsed at the base of Hive Tarantus itself. "The containment cordon cannot hold," announced a figure in the elaborate robes of a senior administratum official. "The lower 70 levels must be considered lost. Initiate separation protocols." Separation protocols. The words sent a chill through me. I knew what they meant, though I had thought them only a rumor, a story told in the worker barracks to frighten new arrivals. The hive cities of Nefaris Secundus had been built with fail-safes, a final solution for containment of catastrophic threats. The lower levels could be physically separated from the upper hive, explosive bolts severing the massive support columns, allowing the contaminated portions to collapse into the underhive, while the upper spires rose on powerful grav generators to escape the destruction. They were going to cut away the lower hive. Everyone below level 70, millions of souls, would be abandoned to the warp entities that now stalked those corridors. Workers, processors, maintenance crews, people I had known my entire life, all sacrificed to preserve the nobility and the administratum elite. A logical decision. The Imperium had always valued order above individual lives. The needs of humanity outweighed the needs of any human. I had processed enough corpses to understand the calculus of imperial governance. Life was the Emperor's currency, spent without hesitation when necessity demanded. But understanding did not ease the horror of witnessing the decision made so coldly, so efficiently. "My lord," said another official, this one bearing the insignia of the Departamento Munitorum, "the evacuation shuttles cannot accommodate all personnel above the separation line. Priority must be assigned." "Priority has already been established," replied the senior official. "Alpha clearance first, followed by Gamma. All others will remain to maintain essential systems until the final shuttle departs." "And after that, my lord?" A pause. "After that, the Emperor will judge their souls." Another death sentence, This one for those who would initially escape the collapse of the lower hive. The officials and functionaries with lesser clearance would be left behind when the final evacuations were complete. Their reward for loyal service would be to die on a doomed world, maintaining systems until the end, allowing their betters to escape. I should have felt outrage. I should have screamed at the injustice. But years of service in the processing chambers had taught me the fundamental truth of imperial existence. Death came for all. The only variables were its timing and manner. The senior official turned, surveying the chamber. For a moment, his eyes seemed to fix on me, and I felt my heart stutter in my chest. Then his gaze moved on, seeing nothing worth his attention in my worker's uniform. "Initiate the separation sequence," he commanded. "May the Emperor forgive our necessity." Alarm klaxons sounded throughout the chamber. The hololith displays shifted, showing countdown timers and structural diagrams of the hive. Functionaries hurried to their stations, their movements taking on new urgency. I remained against the wall, paralyzed by indecision. To stay was to die, either in the collapse if I returned to the lower levels, or in the aftermath if I remained in the upper hive. But where could I go? The evacuation shuttles were for the elite only. There would be no mercy for a processor who had trespassed far above his station. As I stood there, frozen in the face of inevitable death, a new figure entered the command center. Unlike the robed administratum officials, this man wore the distinctive armor of the Inquisition. His coat was black leather, adorned with purity seals and symbols of office. His left eye had been replaced with a glowing augmetic, while his right hand ended in a power claw currently powered down but still lethal in appearance. At his side walked a creature that resembled a human female but was clearly something more. Her skin had a metallic sheen, and her movements were too perfect, too precise to be fully human. The chamber fell silent at their entrance. Even the senior official straightened, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "Lord Inquisitor," he said, bowing deeply, "we did not expect your presence. The evacuation shuttles are being prepared as you ordered." The Inquisitor ignored the greeting, striding directly to the central hololith display. "The corruption has spread further than anticipated," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for a man of his imposing presence. "The separation protocol will not be sufficient. The warp entities have already breached the upper levels in multiple locations." The senior official blanched. "Impossible. Our security cordons are meaningless against the forces of the Imperium," interrupted the Inquisitor. "Your security forces face entities that can move through solid matter, that can possess the minds of your guards, that can reshape reality itself. Conventional containment is futile." "Then what is to be done, my lord?" asked the official, his composure cracking. The Inquisitor studied the hololith display for a long moment before responding. "The evacuation will proceed for inquisitorial staff and selected administratum personnel with information vital to the Imperium. All others will remain to execute the final containment protocol." "Final containment?" The official's voice had risen an octave. "You cannot mean—" "Exterminatus is the only certain solution," said the Inquisitor, still in that soft, almost gentle voice. "The corruption has taken root too deeply. Even if we could evacuate every living soul, the risk of carrying the taint to other worlds is too great. Nefaris Secundus must be cleansed by fire. Exterminatus, the ultimate sanction of the Imperium. The complete destruction of a world deemed irredeemably corrupted." I had heard the term in ministorum sermons, a warning of the price of heresy. I had never imagined I would hear it pronounced upon my own world. The senior official seemed to age years in seconds. "How long do we have?" "The cyclonic torpedoes will be launched once the inquisitorial barges have achieved safe distance. Approximately 6 hours. The Inquisitor turned to his metallic companion. "Compile a list of personnel with alpha priority knowledge. No more than 50 names. They alone will be evacuated." "Yes, Lord," replied the female, her voice carrying the same metallic quality as her skin. 50 names, from a hive of millions. From a world of billions, 50 souls would escape the death of Nefaris Secundus, and I was certainly not among them. The command center erupted into motion again, but now with an undercurrent of panic. The functionaries might not have fully understood what Exterminatus meant, but they recognized a death sentence when they heard one. Some continued their duties with mechanical precision, others wept openly at their stations. A few simply walked away from their posts, perhaps seeking some final comfort in their last hours. The Inquisitor paid them no attention. He gestured to the hololith operator. "Show me the current breach points." The display shifted, highlighting dozens of locations throughout the hive where reality had been compromised. The largest was at the base, where the processing chambers had been, but others dotted the structure all the way to the upper levels. As I watched, new points of light appeared, indicating fresh breaches. "The rate of contamination is accelerating," noted the Inquisitor. "We may have less time than anticipated." The metallic female returned to his side. "I have compiled the list, Lord. 47 individuals meet the criteria for evacuation. They are being gathered as we speak." "Good." The Inquisitor turned to the senior official. "Your name is on the list, Administrator. Your knowledge of the sector's resource distribution will be valuable. Gather whatever data you can carry and proceed to evacuation point Alpha immediately." Relief washed over the official's face, followed quickly by a poor attempt at dignified acceptance. "Thank you, my lord. I will serve the Imperium until my final breath." "See that you do," replied the Inquisitor coldly. "Your final breath may come sooner than you think if you delay." The official hurried away, already calling to assistants to gather critical data slates. The Inquisitor watched him go, his expression unreadable. "Valerin," he said to the metallic female, "initiate the purge protocols in all data repositories. Nothing must remain for the enemy to corrupt." "Yes, Lord. What of the remaining personnel?" The Inquisitor surveyed the command center, his augmetic eye glowing brighter as it scanned the frantic functionaries. "They will serve the Emperor one last time by maintaining systems until the end. Tell them nothing of their fate. Let them die believing their sacrifice has meaning." "As you wish, Lord." I pressed myself flatter against the wall, praying to the God Emperor that the Inquisitor's gaze would pass over me. To be noticed now would mean either immediate execution as an interloper or assignment to some hopeless last stand against the encroaching daemons. The Inquisitor turned toward the exit, then paused. His augmetic eye flared suddenly, and he looked directly at my hiding place. "You," he said, his soft voice somehow carrying clearly across the chamber. "Worker, approach." My limbs moved without conscious direction, carrying me forward to stand before the Inquisitor. Up close, I could see that his human eye was a pale gray, almost white, while the augmetic glowed with a blue light that seemed to penetrate flesh and soul alike. "You do not belong here," he stated. Not a question, but a certainty. "No, Lord," I admitted, seeing no point in denial. "Your name and function?" "Hadrin Kell, Lord. Administratum Worker Grade Epsilon, Processing Chamber 12. The Inquisitor's human eye widened slightly. "Processing Chamber 12. That was the location of the first major breach. You should be dead, Worker. Or worse than dead." I had no response to that. By all logic, he was correct. The Inquisitor studied me more intently, his augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted its focus. "You have been exposed to warp entities. I can see their touch upon your aura, yet you show no signs of corruption. Interesting." The metallic female, Valerin, stepped closer. "Shall I execute him, Lord? He represents a contamination risk." The Inquisitor raised a hand. "Not yet. Worker, how did you escape the breach in Processing Chamber 12? I swallowed, my throat dry with fear. "I fled through a maintenance corridor, Lord. When the daemons withdrew after the explosions." "Withdrew?" The Inquisitor's voice sharpened. "They were not destroyed? They retreated voluntarily?" "Yes, Lord," they said. I hesitated, knowing that repeating daemon speech was itself heresy. "Speak freely," commanded the Inquisitor. "Your words may determine whether you die quickly or suffer the fate of a heretic." They said the anathema's servants resist still, but cannot hold back the tide forever. One of them spoke directly to me. It asked what I would become in the new reality, whether I would cling to the corpse god or embrace transformation. The Inquisitor and Valoran exchanged a glance. Some silent communication passed between them. "The anathema," murmured the Inquisitor, "their name for the Emperor. They fear him still." He refocused on me. "And what was your answer, worker?" "I gave none, Lord. The explosions came, and they withdrew." The Inquisitor was silent for a long moment, studying me with both eyes. Then he turned to Valoran. "Add him to the evacuation list." Valoran's metallic features registered surprise. "My lord? This worker has encountered daemons of the warp and emerged with his sanity and loyalty intact. Moreover, the entities spoke to him directly, suggesting they perceived something of value. He will be brought to Inquisitorial headquarters for further study." My mind reeled. Evacuation? I was to be one of the 50 souls permitted to escape the death of Nefaris Secundus. But the Inquisitorial headquarters meant interrogation, possibly psychic scanning, procedures few survived with mind and body intact. "Thank you, my lord," I managed to say, not knowing what else was expected. The Inquisitor's human eye narrowed. "Do not thank me yet, Hadron Kell. Survival is not always a blessing. Valoran, take him to Evacuation Point Alpha, full containment protocols. He is to be kept in isolation until we reach the Inquisitorial fortress." "Yes, Lord." Valoran gripped my arm with inhuman strength. Her touch was cold, her fingers hard as adamantium against my flesh. As she led me away, the Inquisitor turned back to the hololith display. The last thing I heard him say was, "Increase the security cordon at all breach points. We must hold the line for 5 more hours. After that, the Emperor's fire will cleanse this world of corruption." Valoran guided me through corridors I had never seen before, her grip on my arm unrelenting. Workers and functionaries pressed themselves against walls to let us pass, their eyes downcast, avoiding the gaze of the Inquisitorial agent. None questioned why a simple worker in stained processing uniform was being escorted by such a figure. In the final hours of a dying world, such anomalies were not worth noting. We reached a security checkpoint guarded by figures in the black carapace armor of Inquisitorial stormtroopers. Their helmets concealed their features, but their posture communicated lethal readiness. They carried hellguns, weapons far more advanced than the shotguns and shock mauls of the arbitrators. "Inquisitorial priority," stated Valoran, extending her free hand to interface directly with the security scanner. "Additional evacuee on Lord Inquisitor Varnax's authority." The stormtroopers stepped aside without comment. Beyond the checkpoint lay a chamber that hummed with power. At its center stood a circular platform surrounded by tech priests chanting in binary. The air above the platform shimmered with energy, indicating the presence of a teleportarium, a technology so rare and sacred that most citizens of the Imperium lived their entire lives without glimpsing one. Other evacuees waited near the platform, their faces displaying varying mixtures of relief, guilt, and fear. I recognized the senior administratum official from the command center. He glanced at me with momentary confusion before dismissing my presence as unworthy of his concern. Valoran released my arm. "Wait here. When your name is called, step onto the teleport platform. Do nothing else. Say nothing. Any deviation from these instructions will result in immediate termination." "Yes, madam," I replied, reverting to the formal response ingrained through years of administratum service. She gave me a final, evaluating look from her metallic eyes, then moved away to confer with the tech priests. I stood alone, a worker among the elite, waiting for transportation to an uncertain fate while my world prepared to die. Time passed strangely in that chamber. The evacuees were called forward in small groups. The teleportarium hummed louder each time, the air above the platform rippling like heat haze before the subjects vanished in a flash of light. Some emerged from the process screaming, their bodies contorting in agony before being restrained by waiting Medicae personnel. Others simply collapsed, unconscious or dead. A few walked away under their own power, though their movements were unsteady. The tech priests explained nothing, continuing their binary chants without interruption. The risk of teleportation was accepted as necessary. In the calculus of evacuation, a chance at survival, however painful, outweighed certain death. The chamber shuddered occasionally as impacts struck the hive. Each time, I expected to see the walls torn open, to face the daemons once more. But the upper levels of the hive were better protected than the lower. The security cordons were holding, for now. The senior administratum official was called forward with 2 of his assistants. He straightened his robes, clutching a data slate to his chest like a talisman. As he stepped onto the platform, he looked back at those still waiting. "The Emperor protects," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. The teleportarium activated, the air rippled. The official and his assistants vanished in a flash that left afterimages burned into my vision. There were no screams, no contortions. Perhaps the higher powers had been merciful, or perhaps their suffering would begin at the destination rather than during transit. The list of evacuees dwindled. The tech priests grew more agitated, their binary cant taking on a rhythm that suggested urgency. One turned to Valoran, speaking in Gothic rather than machine language. "Time grows short, Agent. The warp interference increases with each passing minute. Soon the teleportarium will not function at all." Valoran nodded. "Accelerate the process. The remaining evacuees must be transported before we lose the connection." The tech priest bowed, then turned to the waiting group. "The next names will be called. Step forward immediately when heard." Names were called rapidly now. Evacuees hustled onto the platform with minimal preparation. The flashes of teleportation came faster, the screams more frequent. The Medicae personnel worked with mechanical efficiency, dragging away those who emerged damaged, covering with sheets those who did not survive the journey. Called the tech priest finally. I stepped forward, my legs moving automatically. The platform hummed beneath my feet, the energy making my skin prickle and the hairs on my arms stand on end. The tech priests resumed their chanting, louder now, more insistent. "Prepare yourself," Valoran told me, her metallic voice betraying no emotion. "The journey is not pleasant. Focus on a single thought. It may help maintain your sanity during transit." Before I could respond, the teleportarium activated. The world around me dissolved into streams of light and sensation. I felt my body stretching, pulling apart at a molecular level. Pain beyond description flooded every nerve. I tried to scream, but had no mouth, no lungs, no physical form with which to express agony. In that moment of dissolution, suspended between one reality and another, I glimpsed things no human mind was meant to comprehend. The warp churned around the thin corridor of protection created by the teleportarium. Entities moved within that chaos, vast and ancient and hungry. They sensed the passage of souls through their domain and reached out with appendages that defied physical laws. One such entity brushed against my disembodied consciousness. I recognized it as the daemon from Processing Chamber 12. Its voice formed in what remained of my mind. "The choices come sooner than expected, little counter. The universe fractures, reality bends. What will you become when all you know is dust?" I had no voice to respond, but thought formed regardless. "I am Hadrin Kell, I serve the Emperor, I will remain human." The entity made a sound that might have been laughter. Human. Such a limited concept. The galaxy burns, little counter. The rift has opened doors that can never be closed. Even if you survive this day, you will see the truth before the end. No world remains untouched. No soul remains unchallenged. Then it was gone, and I was falling, reforming, screaming with lungs that once again existed. I struck a hard surface. Pain returned, but now it was the mundane pain of physical impact rather than the transcendent agony of molecular disassembly. Hands gripped me, lifting me onto a gurney. A Medicae injected something into my neck. Blessed numbness spread outward from the injection site. A face appeared above me, features blurred by tears of pain I had not realized I was shedding. "Remarkably intact," said a voice. "Minimal physical trauma. Mental state to be assessed." Another voice responded. "Priority inquisitorial subject. Transfer to secure holding once stabilized." The ceiling moved above me as the gurney was pushed forward. I caught glimpses of curved metal walls, purity seals, the distinctive architecture of a void ship. I had made it. I had escaped the dying world of Nefaris Secundus, but the daemon's words echoed in my fading consciousness. "The galaxy burns. The rift has opened doors that can never be closed. No world remains untouched." I closed my eyes, surrendering to the chemical embrace of whatever sedative the Medicae had administered. My last thought before unconsciousness claimed me was a simple one, a prayer and a plea combined. "Emperor, protect us all, for the worst time to be alive had only just begun.